Lights inside the National Combat Arena dimmed until only the massive circular ring remained illuminated beneath a single white spotlight. More than 20,000 spectators filled every seat, their voices blending into a thunderous roar that echoed through the steel rafters above. Television cameras rotated from every angle while reporters hurried along the ringside platform, desperate to capture every second of what had already become the most talked-about martial arts exhibition of the decade. Tonight was supposed to be simple. One man would demonstrate why he had earned the nickname the Unbreakable Mountain. His real name was Magnus Krieger, a towering fighter standing 6 feet 10 inches tall and weighing nearly 340 pounds. Years of judo, sambo, wrestling, and military combat training had transformed him into something people described as less than human. His shoulders looked impossibly wide, thick veins wrapped around forearms the size of ordinary men's thighs. Every step across the canvas sounded like someone dropping heavy concrete blocks. Magnus had traveled across Europe, Russia, and America, crushing every challenger willing to stand in front of him. Some fights lasted 3 minutes. Most lasted less than 30 seconds. People didn't buy tickets expecting competition anymore. They bought tickets hoping to witness destruction. As the announcer introduced him, explosions of golden fireworks erupted around the entrance tunnel. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the arena, "the undefeated champion, the strongest fighter alive, Magnus Krieger." The crowd erupted. Magnus walked slowly toward the ring without acknowledging anyone. His expression remained cold, almost bored, as though defeating another opponent had become no more exciting than finishing breakfast. He climbed over the ropes with surprising ease for someone his size. The ring actually shook beneath his weight. Across from him stood his scheduled opponent, an accomplished heavyweight karate champion named David Mercer. David was no amateur. He stood 6 feet 4, 245 pounds. Former military instructor, multiple-time national champion. Under ordinary circumstances, David would have been considered terrifying. Standing opposite Magnus, he looked painfully ordinary. The referee signaled for the opening exchange. The bell rang. David circled carefully. Magnus didn't move. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't confidence, it was disappointment. David exploded first. A lightning-fast roundhouse kick whipped toward Magnus's ribs. The audience gasped. Magnus simply absorbed it. No reaction, not even a step backward. David threw another combination. Punch, elbow, hook, low kick. Nothing. Magnus stared directly into his eyes. Then he moved. Only once. His enormous hand caught David's wrist in mid-strike. The entire arena froze. David tried pulling away. Nothing happened. It felt like trying to escape from a steel machine. Magnus looked almost amused. "You hit harder than the last one," he muttered quietly. Then he pulled. David's feet actually left the ground. Gasps spread through the audience. Magnus spun once before throwing him across the ring. David crashed against the ropes so violently that the top rope snapped loose from one corner. The audience exploded. Some people stood immediately. Others simply stared. David somehow forced himself back onto one knee. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The referee asked whether he wished to continue. David nodded. He refused to surrender. Magnus respected that. For exactly 3 seconds. David charged again. Magnus stepped inside his attack. A short shoulder strike landed directly into David's chest. The impact sounded like a baseball bat striking solid wood. David collapsed instantly. He couldn't breathe. The referee waved his arms. The fight was over. 42 seconds. Silence filled the arena before applause erupted from every direction. Another victory. Another man broken. Magnus slowly raised both arms. Instead of celebrating, he looked disappointed again. "That's it?" His voice echoed through the arena microphone. "I crossed an ocean for this?" The audience exchanged uncertain glances. Magnus paced around the ring. "I've been promised America's greatest fighters." He pointed toward David, who was still receiving medical attention. "That wasn't a fighter," he laughed. "That was exercise." Some people booed. Others applauded. Magnus enjoyed both reactions equally. "I refuse to leave this arena disappointed." He grabbed the microphone from the announcer. "So here's my offer." He slowly turned toward the audience. "If anyone here believes they can fight, come down." The crowd laughed nervously. Everyone assumed he was joking. He wasn't. "I don't care whether you're a boxer, a wrestler, a karate champion, a soldier, or just someone with too much confidence." He slammed the microphone against his palm. "Come prove me wrong." Nobody moved. Thousands of eyes looked everywhere except toward the ring. Magnus smiled again. "I thought so." His words carried obvious contempt. "I've heard legends about American courage." "I don't see it." The booing became louder. Still, nobody climbed over the barricades. Then Magnus noticed something unusual. Near the middle rows sat a young Asian man wearing a simple white t-shirt, dark trousers, and plain sneakers. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't shouting. He wasn't filming. He wasn't even reacting. He simply watched quietly, with calm, focused eyes. Magnus narrowed his gaze. "There." His finger pointed directly toward him. "You." Several spectators turned around. The young man glanced behind himself, assuming Magnus meant someone else. "No." Magnus smiled wider. "You. The man in the white shirt." More people looked. The camera operators quickly zoomed in. The giant arena screens displayed the young man's face. The audience chuckled. He looked completely ordinary. No expensive clothes, no championship jacket, no bodyguards. Just another spectator. The young man politely shook his head. "I'm only here to watch." His voice barely reached the nearby rows. Magnus laughed loudly. "Exactly. That's why I picked you." The crowd laughed with him. Someone shouted, "Go on!" Another yelled, "Give him a chance!" The young man remained seated. "I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not competing tonight." Magnus leaned against the ropes. "What? Are you scared?" The audience reacted instantly. Some booed, others whistled. The cameras remained fixed on the mysterious spectator. The young man simply smiled. "No, I just don't see a reason." Magnus's smile slowly disappeared. Nobody had ever answered him like that, not with fear, not with anger, simply calm. The giant climbed out of the ring. The crowd became noticeably louder. Security guards exchanged worried looks. Magnus ignored them. Each heavy step echoed across the arena floor as he walked toward the seating area. People hurried aside, creating a clear path without being asked. Within seconds, he stood directly in front of the quiet young man. Up close, the size difference looked almost unreal. Magnus cast a shadow over him. "You've embarrassed me." The young man looked up without changing expression. "That wasn't my intention." "Then stand." "No." Magnus leaned closer. I wasn't asking. Around them, hundreds of smartphones were already recording. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. The young man sighed softly. I came here to enjoy the evening. I'm not looking for trouble. Magnus grabbed the front of his white shirt. The audience gasped. Several security officers rushed forward. Before they could reach them, an elderly voice suddenly echoed from only a few rows away. Magnus! Take your hand off him. Everyone turned. An elderly man with silver hair slowly stood from his seat. He wore the black blazer of a senior tournament official. His face had suddenly lost all color. Magnus frowned. What? The old official stared at the quiet man for several long seconds. Then he looked back at Magnus. His voice trembled. You have absolutely no idea who you're touching. Magnus laughed. Oh? You know him? The old man's answer came without hesitation. I watched him defeat men twice your size, before most people in this arena even knew his name. For the first time that night, the laughter around the arena began to fade. Magnus looked back toward the silent young man. The young man slowly stood. He was barely 5 feet 7 inches tall. Magnus outweighed him by almost 200 pounds. The contrast seemed almost unbelievable. The old official took one slow breath. Then, loud enough for the closest spectators to hear, he whispered, Magnus, if you have any respect for your future, walk away. The giant smiled. I've never walked away from anyone. The young man gently removed Magnus's hand from his shirt. There was no anger in his face, no fear, only quiet confidence. He looked directly into Magnus's eyes and spoke with complete calm. You've challenged everyone in this building. I gave you 3 chances to leave peacefully. You've used all of them. The arena fell completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. No one knew it yet, but within the next few minutes, every person inside that building would witness a fight they would never forget. Silence settled over the arena unlike anything the audience had experienced before. 20,000 people watched without speaking. Even the commentators removed their headsets for a moment, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Magnus Krieger remained face to face with the quiet stranger. He towered over him like a mountain. Bruce Lee looked almost relaxed. His hands rested naturally at his sides. No fighting stance, no clenched fists, no sign of intimidation. Magnus laughed loudly enough for the nearest rows to hear. So this is the mysterious man everyone suddenly respects. He slowly circled Bruce. I expected a champion. Instead, I got a tourist. The audience laughed nervously. Bruce never answered. Magnus stopped directly in front of him again. I've spent my whole life destroying fighters. I know fear when I see it. Bruce finally spoke. You don't. His calm voice carried surprising weight. You only recognize panic. Magnus smirked. Is there a difference? Bruce nodded. A very big one. The giant folded his arms. Then explain it. Bruce looked around the arena. Thousands of eyes stared back. Some people whispered. Others continued recording. Bruce looked back toward Magnus. Panic makes people lose control. Calm lets them see opportunities. Magnus burst into laughter. You actually believe you're dangerous? Bruce answered honestly. I don't enjoy hurting people. Magnus stepped closer. But you can? Bruce's expression never changed. If I have no other choice. The giant shook his head. "I've heard enough philosophy." He turned toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to prove something." He pointed directly at Bruce. "Size." He hit his own chest. "Power." He flexed one enormous arm. "Strength." Then he looked back at Bruce. "Those are the only things that matter." Bruce quietly replied, "That's where you're mistaken." Magnus raised one eyebrow.
"Oh? Show me."
Bruce slowly removed his watch. He folded it carefully, then placed it on an empty spectator seat beside the elderly tournament official. The old man accepted it carefully. Bruce smiled politely. "Thank you." The official swallowed. His hands actually trembled. "I remember seeing that same smile. Many years ago." Bruce gave a respectful nod. "So do I." Magnus rolled his eyes. "Enough talking." He stepped backward. "Come." Bruce looked toward the referee. "There should be rules." Magnus laughed again. "No rules. No referee. No time limit." Bruce shook his head. "There are always rules." Magnus frowned. "What rules?" Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "The rule that every action has consequences." The giant smiled. "We'll see." Security officers quickly surrounded the area. The tournament director hurried down from the control room. Television producers shouted into microphones. Every camera in the building repositioned itself. Within moments, portable barriers created a large, open space between the audience and the arena floor. Nobody wanted to miss this. The elderly official approached Bruce. "You don't have to do this." Bruce smiled gently. "I know." "Then why?" Bruce watched Magnus stretching his shoulders. "Because some lessons cannot be taught with words." The official lowered his head. "I was hoping you'd say no," Bruce answered quietly. "So was I." Across the open floor, Magnus removed the top of his heavyweight gi. The crowd gasped. His upper body looked almost sculpted from stone. Every muscle stood out beneath the bright arena lights. He raised both arms. The audience responded with deafening cheers. Bruce simply walked toward the center. Still wearing the same plain white shirt, dark trousers, simple sneakers, nothing about him suggested he belonged in a fight against the world's most feared heavyweight. People whispered all around the arena, "He's finished." "This won't last." Poor guy. A teenage boy sitting near the front leaned toward his father. "Dad, why isn't he scared?" His father couldn't answer, because Bruce didn't look frightened. He looked peaceful. The referee stepped forward despite Magnus rejecting official rules. "If either of you wishes to stop," Magnus interrupted immediately. "I won't." The referee looked toward Bruce. Bruce nodded. "I understand." The referee stepped away. No bell, no announcement, only silence. Magnus took the first step. Slow, heavy, measured. Bruce didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. Magnus smiled. "Frozen already?" Bruce remained motionless. Another step. Only 3 feet separated them now. Magnus suddenly exploded forward. His right hand shot toward Bruce's throat with frightening speed. The audience screamed. Bruce disappeared. At least, that's how it looked. One instant he stood directly ahead. The next, he was standing beside Magnus. The giant's hand sliced through empty air. Confused murmurs spread across the arena. "What happened? Did he miss? I didn't even see him move." Magnus turned quickly. Bruce stood exactly where he had stopped, calm, balanced, watching. Magnus attacked again. this time with a wide left hook powerful enough to knock out almost anyone alive. Bruce slipped underneath it by only a few inches. The punch created enough force to stir Bruce's shirt, but it never touched him. Another attack, another miss. The audience became quieter. Magnus frowned. He increased his pace. Punch, miss. Back fist, miss. Knee strike, miss. Each attack looked devastating. Each one met nothing but air. Bruce wasn't retreating. He wasn't running. He simply occupied spaces Magnus failed to protect. The commentators stared at their monitors in disbelief. I've never seen footwork like this. It doesn't even look rushed. It's almost dancing. Magnus's breathing grew heavier. Not from exhaustion, from frustration. He launched a sudden spinning elbow. Bruce leaned backward. The strike missed by less than an inch. Gasps erupted again. Bruce answered with nothing. Still no attack. Still no counter. Magnus roared. "Fight me!" Bruce answered calmly. "I am." "No!" "You're avoiding me." Bruce slowly shook his head. "I'm allowing you to understand your mistakes." The words only fueled Magnus's anger. With a furious shout, the giant charged like a bull. His shoulder lowered, his full body weight accelerated forward. Several spectators stood in panic. If that collision landed, it would crush Bruce. The elderly official closed his eyes. He had seen this before, not from Magnus, from Bruce, years ago. Bruce waited until the very last moment. One tiny step, half a turn. One open palm touched Magnus's shoulder. Nothing more. The movement looked almost gentle. The giant flew past him uncontrollably. Unable to stop his own momentum, Magnus crashed directly into one of the heavy steel support barriers surrounding the arena floor. The impact echoed through the building, metal bent inward. The entire barrier slid backward several feet. The audience exploded. Not because Bruce had struck him, because he hadn't. Magnus stared at the damaged barrier in disbelief. He slowly turned around. His breathing had changed. The smile was gone. For the first time that evening, his confidence had cracked. Bruce still hadn't thrown a single punch, not one. Magnus wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his forehead where the barrier had cut his skin. He looked at the red stain on his hand, then at Bruce. "You did that," Bruce answered softly. "No." "You did." Magnus clenched both fists. The veins along his neck swelled. His pride had been wounded more deeply than his body. The crowd could feel it. This was no longer an exhibition. It had become personal. Magnus slowly lowered his center of gravity. His expression changed completely. Gone was the arrogant showman. Standing there now was a trained combat veteran prepared to use every technique he possessed. Bruce noticed the change immediately. For the first time, he raised his hands. Not high, just enough. His feet shifted almost imperceptibly. His weight settled. His breathing slowed even further. The elderly official whispered under his breath, "There it is." The real Bruce Lee. Magnus saw it too. For reasons he couldn't explain, a chill ran down his spine. His instincts screamed a warning his pride refused to hear. Yet he charged forward anyway. And this time, Bruce Lee moved first. Magnus exploded forward with everything he had. No hesitation, no testing, no restraint. His right fist shot toward Bruce's head like a wrecking ball. The air itself seemed to crack as the punch tore through the space between them. Bruce moved. Not backward, not sideways, forward. It happened so quickly that even the high-speed broadcast cameras struggled to capture the sequence. Instead of retreating from the enormous punch, Bruce stepped inside its path. His head tilted barely enough for the fist to pass harmlessly by his cheek. His left forearm brushed Magnus's elbow just enough to redirect its line. At the same instant, Bruce's right palm tapped Magnus lightly beneath the shoulder. It looked insignificant, almost gentle. Yet Magnus stumbled 3 unexpected steps before regaining his balance. The crowd stared in confusion. What was that? He barely touched him. Then why did he lose balance? The commentators replayed the exchange on the giant screens. Even in slow motion, it looked impossible. Bruce hadn't blocked the punch. He had changed its direction by less than an inch. That tiny adjustment had forced Magnus's entire body to rotate off its center. The old tournament official smiled faintly. He isn't fighting the man's strength. He's fighting gravity. Magnus turned sharply. His breathing had become noticeably heavier, not because of exhaustion, because nothing made sense anymore. He had spent years believing overwhelming power solved every problem. Now, every attack felt useless. Bruce stood exactly where he wanted to be, relaxed, watching, waiting. Magnus clenched his fists. No one embarrasses me. He rushed again. This time he unleashed combinations instead of single strikes. A crushing jab, a hook, a spinning elbow, a front kick, a hammer fist. Each attack flowed into the next with frightening speed for a man his size. Bruce answered with movement. Nothing else. His feet barely lifted from the floor. His shoulders rotated. His body slipped through openings that seemed too small to exist. Every attack missed by the width of a finger. The audience had stopped cheering. Nobody wanted to interrupt what they were witnessing. It was as though the entire arena had forgotten how to breathe. Magnus roared with frustration. "Stand still," Bruce answered calmly. "If I stood still, you would learn nothing," Magnus growled. "I'm done playing." He suddenly grabbed one of the heavy steel crowd barriers beside him. Gasps erupted around the arena. The barrier weighed well over 100 pounds. Magnus ripped it free from its supports and hurled it toward Bruce. Spectators screamed. Security officers rushed forward. Bruce watched the spinning metal barrier approach. At the last possible instant, he stepped diagonally. The barrier crashed harmlessly across the empty floor behind him, sending sparks flying. Bruce looked disappointed. "You've begun fighting your anger," Magnus shouted back. "I'm fighting you!" Bruce slowly shook his head. "No, you're fighting yourself." Those words struck harder than any punch. Magnus's face turned crimson. Years of undefeated victories. Years of people fearing him. Years of believing he was unstoppable. All of it was beginning to collapse in front of thousands of witnesses. He charged again. This time, he closed the distance instantly. His enormous arms wrapped around Bruce in a crushing bear hug. The audience gasped. Finally, Magnus had caught him. His massive muscles tightened, bones creaked under the pressure. Commentators shouted, "No one escapes that hold!" Magnus smiled for the first time in several minutes. "I've got you." Bruce's voice remained surprisingly calm. "No. You've got my shirt." Magnus frowned. Before he understood the meaning, Bruce's body relaxed completely. Instead of resisting the pressure, he moved with it. His hips rotated. His shoulders slipped downward. His right foot pivoted between Magnus's stance. In one impossibly smooth motion, Bruce disappeared from the hold. Magnus's arms slammed together around empty air. The audience exploded. How? People stood from every seat. Phones pointed toward the floor from every direction. Even the television commentators fell silent. Bruce now stood behind Magnus. The giant spun around immediately. You... His sentence never finished. Bruce's hand flashed once. A short strike landed against Magnus's ribs, barely visible, barely audible. The sound resembled someone tapping a wooden table. Magnus laughed. That's it? He took one step, then another, then suddenly, his breathing stopped. His eyes widened. His legs became heavy. The laughter vanished. He looked toward Bruce. What? Bruce answered quietly. You rely on muscles. I study structure. Magnus forced air into his lungs. Pain spread through his side. Not sharp, deep. Like something inside his body had suddenly stopped working correctly. The audience watched the giant struggle to breathe. Bruce did not move closer. He waited. Several long seconds passed. Finally, Magnus inhaled again. He looked shocked. What did you hit? Bruce replied, A place you forgot to protect. Magnus's pride refused to let him stop. With a furious roar, he attacked again. Now there was no technique, only rage, wild punches, wild kicks, pure violence. Bruce sighed quietly. So this is what fear looks like. Magnus screamed, I'm not afraid! Bruce looked into his eyes. Then why can't you think? The words echoed across the silent arena. Every person watching understood. Magnus wasn't fighting Bruce anymore. He was fighting humiliation. Bruce finally became the aggressor. Without warning, he stepped forward. A straight punch stopped less than an inch from Magnus's nose. Too fast to follow. Magnus blinked. Another appeared beside his jaw, then one near his throat, another near his ribs, another above his knee. None of them landed. Bruce withdrew every strike before contact. The crowd watched in disbelief. He could hit him any time. Magnus realized it too. For the first time in his career, he understood he wasn't choosing to remain standing. Bruce was allowing him to remain standing. His confidence began to disappear. His shoulders lowered. His breathing became uneven. Bruce stepped back. I don't want to continue. The arena became quiet once again. Magnus stared at him. You could have finished it. Bruce nodded. Several times. Why didn't you? Bruce answered without arrogance. Because defeating someone isn't always the same as helping them. Magnus lowered his head for only a second. The audience thought the fight was over. They were wrong. One of Magnus's trainers suddenly climbed over the barrier. This is ridiculous! Another followed, then another. Within moments, 5 enormous members of Magnus's team surrounded Bruce from different directions. The crowd erupted with angry shouts. That's not fair! Security officers rushed forward, but the men blocked them. The leader pointed at Bruce. You made our champion look weak. You'll answer to all of us. Bruce slowly turned in a full circle, calmly observing every opponent. One held a boxing stance, another favored wrestling. A third stood like a kickboxer. 2 others spread out to trap him from behind. The elderly official closed his eyes. He whispered quietly, They have no idea what they're about to do. Bruce exhaled once. His expression remained peaceful. He spoke softly enough that only the closest people heard him. I tried to end this with one lesson. He looked at the 5 men surrounding him. It seems today requires several. 5 fighters attacked at exactly the same moment. The arena erupted into absolute chaos. The instant the 5 men rushed forward, Thousands of spectators surged to their feet. The arena erupted into absolute chaos. Security guards shouted into their radios. Television commentators forgot they were live. "No! This can't be happening! 5 against 1!" The fighters spread out exactly as trained professionals would. One attacked high, another stayed low. 2 moved toward Bruce's blind side. The largest circled behind him, preparing to lock his arms. They believed numbers would succeed where size had failed. Bruce calmly observed every movement, not with his eyes alone, with his entire body. He could hear their footsteps. He could feel the rhythm of their breathing. He noticed tiny shifts in their shoulders before each attack. Time seemed to slow. The first punch came from the left. Bruce stepped half a foot forward. The punch flew harmlessly past his ear. Without looking, Bruce placed 2 fingers against the man's wrist and gently redirected it. The attack smashed directly into another fighter charging from the opposite direction. Both men stumbled. Before either could recover, Bruce pivoted. The wrestler lunged from behind. Bruce dropped his center of gravity just enough. The wrestler's own momentum carried him over Bruce's shoulder. His massive body flipped through the air before crashing heavily onto the mat. The audience exploded. The fourth fighter threw a spinning kick aimed at Bruce's head. Bruce leaned slightly. The kick missed by inches. Bruce caught the attacker's ankle for only a fraction of a second before releasing it. That tiny interruption destroyed the man's balance. He spun helplessly across the floor before colliding with the steel barrier. The fifth fighter finally reached Bruce. Unlike the others, he waited. Patient, experienced, a former military combat instructor. He watched Bruce carefully. "So, they were right." Bruce remained calm. "What do you mean?" The man smiled. "They said you never waste movement." Bruce nodded once. "Movement wastes energy." The instructor slowly raised his fists. "I won't make their mistakes," Bruce answered respectfully. "I hope not." For several seconds, neither moved. The arena had never been so quiet. Then the instructor attacked. Unlike Magnus, he relied on precision instead of brute force. Fast jabs, sharp elbows, quick level changes. Bruce smiled faintly. Now this was a conversation. Their movements became almost impossible to follow. Strike, slip, counter, pivot, parry, step. Each exchange lasted less than a heartbeat. Neither man landed a clean blow. The audience watched in stunned silence. The commentators replayed every exchange in slow motion. Even then, most of Bruce's movements remained difficult to understand. The instructor suddenly changed strategy. Instead of striking, he feinted. Bruce didn't react. Another feint. Still nothing. The instructor smiled. "I knew it." Bruce tilted his head. "Knew what?" "You don't chase distractions." Bruce answered. "No. I watch intentions." The instructor's smile disappeared. Before he could launch another attack, Bruce moved. 3 lightning-fast strikes landed, one against the shoulder, one against the forearm, one against the chest. None looked powerful, yet the instructor's entire right arm suddenly dropped uselessly to his side. His fingers refused to close. Shock filled his face. "My arm!" Bruce stepped back. "It will recover." "In a few minutes." The instructor stared. "You could have broken it." Bruce nodded. "I chose not to." The instructor slowly lowered his head. "I understand." He stepped backward. "I'm finished." The audience applauded, not because someone had lost, because someone had recognized the truth. Only Magnus remained standing. His breathing was heavy. His forehead glistened with sweat. He had watched every second. Every illusion he had built around his own invincibility had collapsed. Bruce walked toward him slowly, peacefully. Magnus looked around. His team had fallen. Not one of them had suffered a serious injury. Not one broken bone. Not one unconscious body. Bruce had defeated all of them. Without cruelty, without anger, without celebrating. Magnus finally spoke. "I've beaten men stronger than you." Bruce nodded. "I know. I've beaten younger men." "I know. I've beaten faster men." Bruce nodded again. "I know." Magnus looked confused. "Then why couldn't I touch you?" Bruce smiled gently. "Because you weren't trying to understand me. You were trying to defeat an idea you created in your own mind." Magnus frowned. Bruce continued. "You saw my height, my weight, my clothes. You decided who I was before we ever met." Magnus slowly looked toward the floor. Every word was true. Bruce extended his hand. "Strength is a gift. So is humility. The second one lasts longer." The entire arena watched. 20,000 people waited. Magnus stared at the offered hand. Seconds passed. Finally, the giant accepted it. The applause began quietly. Then it grew louder, louder, until the entire building shook. People who had been cheering for violence now applauded respect. Magnus looked Bruce directly in the eyes. "I owe you an apology." Bruce shook his head. "You owe yourself a better future." Magnus took a deep breath. "I challenged a stranger because I wanted everyone to fear me." Bruce answered softly. "And now?" Magnus looked around the arena. Thousands of faces looked back, some smiling, some emotional, some still unable to believe what they had witnessed. "I'd rather earn their respect." Bruce smiled. "That's much harder, but much more valuable." The elderly tournament official slowly approached them. His eyes had become moist. "I never thought I'd witness something like this again." Bruce chuckled quietly. "Neither did I." The old official looked toward Magnus. "You've just received the most valuable lesson of your career." Magnus nodded. "And the most painful." Bruce laughed softly. "No. The painful lessons are the ones we refuse to learn." A young boy from the front row gathered enough courage to walk toward Bruce. He held out a small notebook with trembling hands. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Bruce knelt so they were eye to eye. "Of course." "Were you never afraid?" Bruce smiled. "I was." The boy looked surprised. "You were?" Bruce nodded. "Fear visits everyone. The difference is whether you let it become your master." The boy thought carefully before asking another question. "So, what makes someone the strongest fighter?" Bruce looked across the arena. At Magnus. At the 5 men helping each other stand. At the cheering audience. Then back to the child. The strongest fighter isn't the person who wins every battle. It's the person who never lets pride become stronger than wisdom. The boy smiled. "I'll remember that." Bruce stood and quietly collected the simple watch he had placed on the empty seat before the fight. He fastened it around his wrist. There were no victory poses, no celebration, no speech to the cameras. He simply walked toward the exit. As he reached the tunnel leading out of the arena, thousands of spectators rose together, one by one, then row after row. Soon, Every person inside the building was standing. Not because someone had been knocked unconscious, not because they had witnessed the most violent fight in history. They stood because they had witnessed something far rarer. A man powerful enough to dominate everyone in the arena, who chose restraint over revenge. Bruce paused briefly without turning around. He raised one hand in quiet acknowledgement, then disappeared into the darkness beyond the tunnel. For several long moments, nobody moved. Magnus finally broke the silence. Looking toward the empty entrance where Bruce had vanished, he whispered words the nearest microphone barely managed to capture. I picked the wrong man in the crowd, and it became the greatest day of my life. The arena remained silent for another heartbeat. Then a standing ovation thundered through the building, an unforgettable ending to a night that would be remembered not for the power of one fighter, but for the character of another.